Partnered with Dennis International to promote sustainable development goals and responsible business conduct. Speaking to Smart 24 TV, Lydia Tusime, the communication officer of Uganda Manufacturers Association, says that this is aiming at extending knowledge to different manufacturers in Uganda for sustainable manufacturing processes. Pedison Mumbere has more of this report.
Partnered with Danish Industries, and they're supporting us in this noble cause. And this is the first engagement with our members, part of them, due to COVID-19. And as the UMA, we're going to extend this far beyond just these few members that were here today to ensure that going forward, they look out for initiatives that will ensure business continuity. And this is in regard to the environment in which they work, to ensure that if they're going to introduce new products, how will they ensure that this won't affect the livelihood? For instance, from the fumes that come out of that, the pollution and all that, how are they going to mitigate it? The investments are really high, that's for sure, but the partnerships we've had with like the DI, they're actually willing to link our members to even other companies that have done the same in those other countries that can help us start somewhere and even invest together with them.
The Sustainable Development Goals are a global call to action to end poverty, protect the Earth's environment and climate, and ensure that people everywhere can enjoy peace and prosperity. These are the goals the UN is working on in Uganda. On top of that, the Uganda Manufacturers Association has partnered with Danish International to promote sustainable development goals and responsible business conduct. Speaking to Smart 24 TV, Lydia Tusime, the communications officer at Uganda Manufacturers Association, this partnership is aiming at extending more knowledge to Uganda's manufacturers as well as sustainable manufacturing processes.
And this is aimed at extending knowledge to our different manufacturers on how they can implement these initiatives into their businesses. And the idea behind is to ensure that we have sustainable manufacturing going forward. That how will they ensure that their businesses will be able to continue to survive even after them, while looking at the environment and considering other elements that ensure business sustainability.
Uganda has a substantial trading potential and opportunities in her domestic, regional and international markets. However, most traders in Uganda, especially the indigenous small and medium-scale entrepreneurs, find it hard to sustain their business, for it is costly. However, Tusime urged the business fraternity to first appreciate the benefits that comes in the long run.
Definitely, it does. And what we are pushing out as the UMA is for companies to first appreciate the benefits, the underlying benefits. The initial costs may be high, but if you looked at the long term, there'll be more benefits for business sustainability, because if you looked at where the world is heading right now, businesses need to be responsible enough for the communities and for the livelihoods in which they live in.
We are so much to business ethics, business sustainability, and trying to ensure that we have best practices. This is not only for us as a company to gain from, but it is to ensure that we are protecting the consumer. We are investing money for value, for the good of the country. But as well, if you want to operate with international bodies according to the best acceptable practices of the world, you know very well we have standards, we have ethics. So you need to invest into how best you can promote this. It is costly in the short run, but in the long run, it yields results. And it's better to do the right things right first.
Responsible business conduct is everything to SMEs, even if they see it wrongly as financial choco screening. Access to market is linked to image. Unlike large enterprises, SMEs invest large sums in managing their brand. Their image is based on a day-to-day behavior, so behaving responsibly is the key to surviving and thriving your business.
With responsible business conduct and business ethics is we actually seen as a mindset. It means that you do what is expected of you, both as an employee, and you do the right thing. That means that you need to comply with national and international laws, specific requirements for your industry, and internal codes and policies.
Pedison Mumbere, Smart 24.
Uganda has substantial trading potential and opportunities in her domestic, regional, and international markets. However, most traders in Uganda, especially the indigenous and small medium-scale entrepreneurs, find it quite hard to sustain their businesses, for it is costly. However, Tusime urged the business fraternity to first appreciate the benefit come in the long run. This particular partnership, according to Tusime Lydia, the communications officer of Uganda Manufacturers Associations, who are having their headquarters at UMA at Lugogo, says that this is aiming at extending knowledge to different manufacturers in Uganda for sustainable manufacturing processes. And the Sustainable Development Goals is a global call to action to end poverty, protect the earth, as well as ensuring that people everywhere can enjoy peace and prosperity. These are some of the goals of the UN that is actually working on board with Uganda to clearly see that this comes to pass. On top of that, the Uganda Manufacturers Associations did partner with Dennis International to promote sustainable development goals and responsible business conduct. And as you've definitely seen, Tumsime, the communications officer at Uganda, says the partnership is aiming at extending knowledge to the Ugandan manufacturers, more so with those from the small scale and medium-sized enterprises, to clearly see that they have more they're actually being targeted as attaching more skills to them, and actually also tapping into the available markets in the country. Moving on, the education sector in Uganda has created a worrying state for the future of students based in the villages who can access online studies. Dorothy Wengoy Chimoli, the public relations officer from Uganda Technology and Management University, believes the nature of education in Uganda is still based on a traditional way of dispersing knowledge. More of this story.
The closure of schools has had far-reaching impacts on the socio-economic well-being of the country and has had underlying effects that have widened a gap between students from the richer families and those from the poor families. According to Dorothy Chimoli, the expert from the sector of higher education, the nature of education in Uganda is still based on the traditional way of dispersing knowledge because most of the students are still based in the rural areas, which has actually created a gap whereby those from the privileged families are actually getting online facilities at the expense of the poor ones.
And most of it is because the majority of our pupils, of our students, are still rural based. And to be able to transform the education sector today and to be able to embrace the current trends, there are certain aspects of the holistic national program that have to be transformed. Give an example. You find that most people in the central, or let me say in the urban centers, are studying online. Most schools in the urban centers, non-schools, we are talking of Green Hill, we are talking of Kaboja Junior School, primary, are studying online. But many pupils and students in the rural area cannot afford these facilities, majorly because the government has a role to play. We are talking about electricity. You get it? There is the Rural Electricity Transformation, Rural Electrification Agency that is in place. But to what extent have they gone deep down in the villages to make sure that these people access power? You get it? And even if they have gone, I'll give an example. I also come from a village. They put the pole, the power is there. But how many people can afford the cost of power from that pole to the households? Not many, because of the income levels of most of our citizens.
Poverty has greatly killed the transformation process in the education sector in Uganda, which has made it difficult for most of the pupils and students in the rural areas to continue with education because of issues of money to facilitate their online studies.
Killing the transformation process. Why? Because COVID has taught us that you don't have to be physically present to move forward, but you must embrace the digital world. You must embrace and engage the digital space. But you find that the majority of the pupils cannot embrace, have even probably not heard about it. And yet they must be involved in this transformation process. So as a country, to be able to redirect the direction, to be able to redirect the education sector, there is so much that's at play that must be addressed to make sure that all citizens are on board. And one of the things that shows that it is lacking, students are studying online in Kampala, isn't it? But when schools open, all that is put aside and say, begin again. Instead of moving forward, they are taking us backwards. And why is that so? Because they do not want to leave the rural behind. We all sit for the same national exams. So what I think needs to be done is that we must be serious. For starters, seriousness and commitment to transform. And secondly, what does the world need? Like I had mentioned earlier, we must learn to specialize. And specialization doesn't start at university. We are wasting so many years living in the 1900 education. You get it? And yet the world is not static in the 1900 ways of doing things. So we must revisit what the world has in store for us today and prepare for that right from a very young age, such that by the time the generations are ushered into the future, they are adequately prepared and adequately knowledgeable to compete fairly with the rest of the global.
With the economic changes prevailing in the world, the education system in Uganda should quickly adopt to enriching the young ones into technology right off from childhood, so as to keep up with the e-commerce competition, and this should be addressed by the government setting up platforms that will ease internet use in schools. The National COVID-19 Task Force is expected to reconvene this week to discuss the new dates for the reopening of schools after putting in consideration the proposals of His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni.
Sounds of Pedison Mumbere, and for that particular report, the National COVID Task Force is set to actually reconvene in preparations to see that schools will be reopened in the country by clearing out and setting out the TIFU guidelines. Like we did mention in our business tips, one of the bigger pictures that we need to look up in the education sector is to see that the key players or the stakeholders in the education system in Uganda should actually utilize the e-commerce space, all the digital space that is available, to see that by the time schools are reopened or once schools are getting back to the lockdown, at least education continues safely and efficiently, because that is more of a help. That is actually going to be helpful to the students and also to their future. And this is actually, according to the state that is here, it is actually in a worrying situation for the future of these students. Why? Because most of them are worryingly seated at home. They just have no reference when they're actually going to get back to school, and most of them still don't know whether that education can actually lead them to the future that they want. Can they actually compete with this particular world? Because if we were to mention about the rural best students in the country, most of them have no idea of the fact, don't have ideas regarding the online classes and lectures that are taking place. So which means if at all they get by the time they will get adopted, actually they step into the adoption of the online classes, it will be too late for them to actually compete favorably with the available situation in regards to tapping into the digital spaces. So to the government, they should actually consider that, but as well as the school owners and the proprietors should actually consider creating space for students to tap into the e-commerce sector. Let's head To the next one, as Ramadan Gobi has Ugandans abroad to return and invest home. The Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development has assured Ugandans in the diaspora that the government has no intention to taking over or taxing unclaimed balances in bank accounts or mobile money accounts. More of the details.
The Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, Ramadan Ngowi, has assured Ugandans in the diaspora that the government has no intention of taking over or even taxing unclaimed balances in the bank accounts or mobile money accounts. Ngowi was addressing members of Ugandan North American Association about misleading media reports that the government plans to tax depositors, idle cash on dormant bank accounts under the National Payment System Act. He said that rumors that money is needed by the government to pay its debts are false, and that Uganda is among the few sub-Saharan African countries with a sustainable debt portfolio. According to Ngowi, the existing legal framework is made to protect remittance of cash from abroad. Ngowi encouraged Ugandans in the diaspora to come and invest at home and take advantage of available opportunities. He explained that the legal framework which manages the financial system was designed to protect the money owners. The move has also prompted the Uganda Bankers Association to issue a statement describing the media report as misleading and works contrary to the efforts being made towards driving financial inclusion.
The move has prompted the Uganda Bankers Association, UBA, to issue a statement describing the media report as misleading and works of contrary to the efforts of being made towards driving financial inclusions. And according to the Permanent Secretary from the Ministry, the Permanent Secretary to the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, Ramadan Gobi, he did actually mention that Ugandans in the diaspora should actually come back and invest home, because this would actually help cut off the idea of foreign investors coming to invest, because this would see that we are actually getting more money from our fellow Ugandans who are working from abroad and getting their money, but they can actually still invest from the country. And according to him, he that the government has no intention of taking over or even taxing unclaimed balances in bank accounts or the mobile money accounts. For those in the diaspora that are streaming live on Smart 24 TV, so clearly I hope that message has reached home. We head to the international scene to see what is making headlines across borders. We start with Kenya now, as Kenya is seeking IMF aid to repay China loans. Kenya is actually considering using reserves from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, to compensate for Chinese loans it repaid after the Treasury dropped an earlier request to defer the debt payments. More of this story.
Kenya had expected to extend a debt repayment moratorium from bilateral lenders, including China, which started in January 2021, by another 6 months to December 2021, taking it from making payments of nearly 50 billion Kenyan shillings to Beijing lenders. Chinese lenders, especially Exim Bank, were uncomfortable with Kenya's push for extension of the debt service suspension with rich nations, prompting delays in disbursements to projects funded by Chinese financiers. This forced Nairobi to drop its push for the debt repayment holiday extension by China for fear of straining relations with Kenya's biggest bilateral creditor. The International Monetary Fund is expected to play a role in shaping policy that would require the government to implement tough conditions across many sectors. The conditions are tied to the fund's multi-billion shilling loan facilities to Kenya, where money flows straight into the budget to top up the public purse. Kenya sought an extension of the debt relief from G20 countries to December, paying additional savings of 39 billion Kenyan shillings. Dr. Sirima says response to Kenya's request for G20 relief has been positive. While China is a G20 member and a signatory to the deal, a large proportion of its loans to Kenya has been made on a commercial basis by government agencies, quasi-public corporations, and by state-owned banks such as China Development Bank and Exim Bank of China. President Uhuru Kenyatta's administration has largely taken loans from China since 2014 to build roads, bridges, power plants, and the standard gauge railway. The terms of China's loan deals with developing countries are unusually secretive and require borrowers to prioritize repayment to Chinese state-owned banks ahead of other creditors. A cache of such contracts was revealed in an earlier report by Reuters.
Let me pick up from the last line. The terms of Chinese loan deals with developing countries are unusually secretive and require borrowers to prioritize repayment to Chinese state-owned banks ahead of other creditors. A cache of such contracts was revealed in an earlier report. And you could definitely agree that most of the African countries, not only Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Democratic Republic of Congo, Guinea, most of them, Angola, have actually been carrying out these particular deals with the Chinese companies. That has actually led to the construction and development of infrastructure, including the roads, hotels. If you can definitely agree, in Angola, China set up a very big, it's just like a urban estate for the Chinese in Angola, as well as some of the natives in Angola. And also in Kenya, these projects like the Standard Gauge Railway was built with the loans from the Chinese government. And also with Uganda's Entebbe Express Highway, the same issue. So you can clearly see what is, and the bigger question is, however, what is the future of Africa in regards to these particular loans that the population has actually having no idea of the deals the governments have signed between these particular initiatives with the Chinese government. So that is one of the bigger questions that we want to identify, because if it is happening in Kenya, who knows, it may happen in another country, and Uganda inclusive. Moving on, and still in Kenya, meanwhile, Nairobi County government will spend 13 million Kenyan shillings on a generator to light up City Hall and City Hall Annex during power outages. The plan, contained in the Nairobi County Annual Development Plan for the financial year ending June 30th, 2023, is set to be actualized in the current financial year. More of this story.
The allocation for the purchase of the generator is part of 128 million Kenyan shillings to be spent by the Anne Kananu-led administration in the financial year ending June 30th, 2022, on different projects, including giving City Hall a facelift through rehabilitation, refurbishment, and repainting. City Hall has suffered a series of power cuts by Kenya Power over electricity debts, with the first disconnection playing out in January 2015 when City Hall was plugged into darkness for 3 days after a year of court battles. Consequently, the electricity cuts have led to the interruption of services in the affected county installation as the two entities battle over the electricity bill, some inherited from the deficient city council. In May this year, the Nairobi County government set aside 691 million shillings to clear the debt, bid to bring to an end perennial power blackouts caused by the utility firm cutting off the electricity supply. According to the Nairobi County Debt Management Strategy paper for the financial year ending June 30th, 2022, City Hall owes the power distributor 691.58 million Kenyan shillings in electricity bills. Nairobi County Assembly Budget and Appropriation Committee Chairman Robert Mbatia said that the allocation is intended to bring to an end the back and forth between City Hall and Kenya Power over debts owed to each other. In June, Kenya Power struck again, cutting off electricity supply to City Hall and City Hall Annex after the county delayed releasing the money. City Hall has in the past been reluctant to clear the debt, claiming the utility provider owes them 856 million Kenyan shillings in wayleave charges that have not been paid for years.
Unlike some countries, the City Halls are actually also facing some issues. Now, the City Hall in Kenya has in the past been reluctant to clear the debt, claiming the utility provider owes them 856 million in wayleave charges that have not been paid for quite some time, which is a period of over 3 years. And if you would definitely see that the allocation for the purchase of the generator is part of the 128 million Kenyan shillings to be spent by the Anne Kananu-led administration in the financial year ending June 2022, 30th June 2022, which will clearly see that the City Hall in Nairobi gets themselves a new generator to actually help them out once there is power outages in the area. Lastly, in our international updates in regards to the business stories, the Uber Chief Executive Officer Dara Khosrowshahi aims for fully green food delivery business. Now, Uber wants to expand its zero emissions pledge to food delivery and make the business environmentally sustainable. More of this story.
The CEO said in an interview that food deliveries Uber makes in Europe are typically carried on scooters and bikes, so it prioritizes cars for its green ambitions. In a manifesto organized by European City Network Police and backed by Uber, e-sector operator Lime, air taxi company Lilian, and several others, they called for Europe to bring forward zero emissions targets for mobility to 2035. The European Union has previously said it aims to be carbon neutral by 2050. William Toltz, Executive Director of Transport and Environment and Advocacy Group, said the manifesto reflects a good level of ambition, but added that he thought transportation inside major cities be emission-free by 2025 and that the regulators should impose rules mandating food delivery be emissions-free. There has also been issues for mobility companies pursuing greener businesses, as Uber and Lyft Incorporate's 2030 deadline to transition entirely to electric vehicles in North America and Europe has come with a tentative and incomplete approach that trailed broad adoption of electric vehicles in the US's passenger fleet. Some of the companies have adopted faster timelines to decarbonize parts of their businesses, such as Uber and Lime, which target 2030 to achieve the net zero emissions on part or all of their businesses. In 2020, Uber reported that its total emissions stood at more than 3 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, as Lime's disclosure excluded Scope 3 emissions, which are emissions that come from its value chain and are likely the biggest portion of its total.
And in that particular aspect regarding Uber actually coming up in 2020, it had actually reported that its total emissions stood at more than 3 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Lime's disclosures excluded Scope 3 emissions, which are emissions that actually come from its value chain and are likely the biggest portion of its total. That brings us to the end of our news hour. Coming up is the topical analysis in regards to the business stories. Keep it SMB.